And when we were thinking about a panel, if you'll remember Andy's presentation, we really started out thematically with bringing together the lease administration function, the lease accounting function. What does that mean from a product and standpoint, right? But also, what does it mean organizationally, and what does it mean in terms of executing a project, and how do people start doing things they haven't had to do before, and so forth. So in thinking about this, we came up with three kind of basic questions. So first is, what on the lease administration side and on the lease accounting side, what did the two groups wish they kind of knew about each other in terms of their roles, their needs, their requirements, and so forth. And then always a great topic, what are some key lessons learned along the journey of implementing a system and managing a system. And then especially for the three customers that we have here today, just a word about connected CoStar. It turns out that the three companies represented today have each got a pretty good bundle of integrations and are receiving a lot of the business value that we talked about earlier today. So I'd like to introduce our panel. So first we have Cindy Cartney, and Cindy's Vice President and Director of the Admin Services at U.S. Bank. And maybe I have to just ask Cindy one quick question. How long have you been a CoStar customer?
Since 2001.
2001. So it's a great story to tell, because in all of our terrific slides, we talk about how we've been in business for about 20 years, and U.S. Bank was certainly an early customer. We also have joining us Jim Meade, and Jim is the controller with Veritiv. So thank you, Jim, and hello. And then finally, Trey Thrower, and Trey is Director of Fixed Assets and Leases at Inspire Brands. And the way I'd like to get us started today is just have each of our panelists talk a little bit about their companies. So Trey, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Would you just talk at a high level about Inspire Brands, and then help the audience understand some context about your lease portfolio, just in terms of scope and scale, right?
Okay. So Inspire Brands, we were formerly Arby's Restaurant Group, and we have grown pretty dramatically over the last 2 years. Actually, this slide is outdated. Since this slide was published, we've entered into an agreement to purchase Jimmy John's. So that should close by the end of this month, and it will push us over $14 billion in system sales and over 11,000 restaurants. So we've grown quite a bit. I've been with Inspire Brands for 8 years now, formerly with Arby's Restaurant Group, now with Inspire Brands. And our lease portfolio, we have approximately 2,000 real estate locations and another several thousand equipment leases.
Okay, terrific. So, and a real aggressive acquisition trail. I think we're going to find that to be a bit of a common thread between the folks that are here. So Jim, can you do the same thing in terms of Veritiv? Just give us the high-level view of Veritiv, and then tell us a little bit about the lease portfolio in terms of scope and scale.
Sure. Veritiv Corporation, not many people have heard of us. We've only been in existence 5 years. Spin off of International Paper and Georgia Pacific. $5 billion company, $4 billion company coming together. Did a merger, then immediately did an IPO. So very unique story, very unique systems from both legacy companies. So relatively large, $9 billion. Our lease portfolio about $210 on real estate, because we run warehouse and transportation, as indicated on the slide, and around 3,600 non-real estate. So that's tractors, trailers, high lifts, forklifts, anything inside a warehouse or on the road.
Great. So one of the things too that I was so excited about coming into the panel is the diversity that's represented here, right? In terms of brands, type of business, scope and scale, and so forth. Wanted to ask you, Jim, as well. Can you just comment on the international side of your business, because I think that might be unique to you, and the panel are somewhat unique.
Well, we're predominantly a North American operation, so we have a primary ERP. I know ERPs are,
Yeah.
We have 6 environments. We have 2 primary domestic U.S., but here's my point. A lot of our revenue is domestic U.S., Canada, and then we operate in 12 specific geos. So we do have 12 different currencies, right, to administer and everything, but we are primarily a North American company.
Great.
Yep.
And then Cindy, a little bit about U.S. Bank and scope and scale of your portfolio.
So U.S. Bank's fifth largest bank in the United States. A little known fact, the U.S. actually does stand for United States. We were grandfathered in the 1950s when the U.S. government had said no more companies can be named U.S. They took it away, but we kept the grandfather since we had had it since the late 1800s. We have 3,500 locations across the U.S. and in the European Union. About half of them are owned, half of them are leased. We have 1,800 bank as tenant leases and about 1,100 bank as landlord leases. Those bank as landlord leases are typically in our owned locations.
Thanks. But something else I was really intrigued about in talking to this group and as we're preparing for the panel. So how many acquisitions have you been through? Little ones, big ones, and so forth since US Bank?
I just completed my 38th acquisition at US Bank. So it can be anything from a business product that we're integrating, but there's always real estate involved. This year was my first year where we did an acquisition and they said, "Oh, Cindy, there's no real estate involved." And I'm like, what? So, but yeah, it's been an interesting ride. 25 years, 38 acquisitions.
And Jim, how about you? Because I remember this was a topic with you as well.
Well, with this company, two major ones, obviously the first one, and then we did acquisition in Miami. Prior to that, I did 16 with my legacy companies, Stanley Black & Decker, UPS, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. So a lot of M&A, ASC 305 stuff, Fair Value.
Yeah. And Trey, we've already heard you're in the fire of it.
We're
it's
in
an
the fire of it,
acquisition
yes.
strategy for growth. So I wanted the audience to understand that if you are looking for a group of customers that really understand change, right, and inheriting legacy systems and legacy departments, right, lease administration departments and lease accounting departments that are new to the organization, this group has got a tremendous amount of experience in accommodating that level of change. So let's turn our attention to those three questions, and they're pretty broad. But so Jim, I'll start with you. So we have two people here that are more fundamentally from the accounting side, and then Cindy is certainly much more from the real estate side. So we're bringing that composite of experience together, right? But Jim, I'll start with you. So from the accounting leadership side, as you look to the administrative side of the business where the real estate leases and equipment leases are, and they're the stewards of those leases, what do you sort of wish they knew about your side of the business and the requirements that you have of that administrative function as it comes to you for the accounting?
That's a great question. There's 2 points that come to mind. The first point is kind of self-intuitive. You have to have accurate lease data. I'm talking really on the implementation side prior to even doing the upload to CoStar, but you have to have accurate data. So you got to scrub it. You got to find a way to scrub it. In addition, when you flip over to 842, it introduces more complexity. For example, on your real estate leases, you have to determine there's new guidance, right? Reasonably certain, reasonably sure if you're going to renew. So if you don't get that right, if you don't document that, it impacts your right of use asset setup. So you've got to make sure that you understand the accuracy of your data and make sure you vet it out prior to even uploading. So it's a little garbage in, garbage out, right, concept, but it's very, very true. The second point is you have to have a process. So as we were, compiling our 200, real estate, which was relatively easy because we went from legacy system moving over to CoStar, our non-real estate was a challenge. 3,600 non-real estate. You can imagine with two legacy large companies, the language in the contracts themselves. We had to come up with a process to standardize what data fields we're going to extract from those leases, and then put them in a process so we can review it. We chose Microsoft Access. Over a 3-month period, 3 full-time equivalents, we did a lot of scrubbing. And that paid off because once we did the ETL, we got the information into CoStar, we were able to have confidence of the data coming out.
Yep.
So those 2 points.
So I think we'll see that as a common theme, and we actually heard a lot about that today when Kelly and Mark were talking about the relationship between lease administration and lease accounting. So turning to you, Cindy, I'm thinking about your world a little bit, right? You actually have a pretty well-organized real estate lease portfolio. Well, let's say, at least you started off that way, and along comes lease accounting, right, out of the blue. So you're sitting over on your side of the world, if you will. What's important for the lease accounting folks to understand about the impact of that on your side of the business?
I think the biggest thing was that what they're doing on accounting affects what's already in our lease abstracts. And when you have 1,800 leases and they say, well, we want to change how this option is being reported, it's not like blinking your eye and everything can change automatically. So I think it's having that understanding that their decisions have a waterfall effect onto what's already in the system. Because we were lucky when we started, with the new accounting standard, we had the information in CoStar.
Mm-hmm.
But was it the way it needed to be?
Exactly.
It absolutely was not. So there was a lot of time and effort spent. And I think just understanding what they needed to do to build their schedules so that you could build the abstract so that you could go backwards.
Mm.
But without that understanding, you're swimming upstream.
Yep. So Trey, how about you? So again, from your side of the business, as you brought in this data from the real estate and equipment contracts, what do you wish that they understood about your side of the business, and maybe what were some of the challenges along the way?
So for us, our lease administration team is in our legal department, so they function separately from our lease accounting team. And bringing everyone together in CoStar made that working relationship much easier. When we went out looking for our system, our real estate system, and doing our RFPs, we worked closely together to try and find something that satisfied both departments and that would be easy to work in for both groups. And make sure that we have enough controls in the system that they're working on their sections without being able to accidentally or inadvertently change ours and vice versa. So one takeaway is that you want to work together, find a system that both people can work with efficiently. And actually, I think our lease administration team drove the CoStar decision more than the accounting department. I was surprised by that. But we've actually been pretty spoiled. We've had a great working relationship with our lease admin team, and we were working very closely together even before 842. So gathering those leases was not hard from the legacy Arby's side, but what I've learned through the process is as we've acquired other companies, that relationship isn't the same everywhere. So it's been more difficult to find the information. Obviously, going in and working on a brand that you've newly acquired, you don't know the history or the context of it. You don't know the contacts that you need to talk to right away. So I think that having everyone in the same system and having that relationship is just the most important thing. I mean, all the details and the options and everything else, that just kind of flows naturally out of that working relationship.
Cindy, I just thought of something that I think you mentioned when we were on the phone, and I believe it's actually been mentioned in some of the other conversations. How important is it for the administrators to understand just what lease accounting is about? In other words, to not just blindly enter the information, but to try to understand its purpose and what's behind it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think there's a misconception that, with lease abstracting, all you're doing is just data entering what's in the lease, right? And it's way more than that. I've had the opportunity recently, I lost a staff member, and I've been able to abstract. And you really have to have an understanding of what is happening on the accounting side so that you know what to capture so that everything flows smoothly. But by just, looking at the lease and data entering it, you're gonna have errors. So it's so important to have that accounting understanding. Even so now when we do training, we actually have them sit with the accountants so that they understand how schedules are
That's
set up.
a great tip.
So that they know when they're doing the abstract what pieces are going to affect that schedule.
Yeah. I think, this is a little bit more on the, let's call it the emotional side and the people side, but it's always helpful when somebody understands the why behind the what, right? So you're toiling through on this abstraction process, like, why do they need this data? I keep having to do this. But when they start to understand, oh, this is why it's important, this is why that data's got to flow across, I get it now. Doesn't make the job easier per se, but at least that level of understanding, right, helps people understand why they're contributing to a larger mission and requirement over on the accounting side. So kind of our second question was lessons learned. Maybe we've touched on a little bit of them already, but Trey, maybe I'll turn back to you. When we were talking and we were talking about the journey, right? We talked about some lessons learned along the way, maybe some things you wish you'd have done differently, or just counsel you would give to others about the lessons learned. So can you comment on that a little bit?
I can say there are a lot of things I would have loved to have done differently. But the one thing is being able to be in the same system or speak the same language with the lease administrators is helpful, because you're always not speaking the same language in your business function, but at least being able to point them to the right fields or have them point you to the right fields, and helping them understand what they change and when they change and how that impacts us and how that impacts the company is important. And also important for us to understand why they're entering things the way they are. It's not just a one-way street. Accounting is not the only reason that we're in this system. So it's definitely a shared platform. I think everyone here recognizes probably the challenge of getting all of your information in one place and being able to easily access it and look it up. I think one of the projects that we did and we're getting a lot of benefit from is we went through and scanned all of our lease documents into CoStar, and we digitized our table of contents. It makes it really easy to pull up and click on a section and go straight to the lease. That helps with lease testing from an accounting standpoint. If you need to dig in and find that information, I think it's probably hands down the best thing we've done as far as streamlining the research around the leases.
Yeah. So I think everyone's commented a bit on the shared language and educating each other and so forth. Can you just talk a little bit more about the acquisitions? Like what are you finding as these new ones come on board? So you had your RV shop, you started to get that pretty well oiled, right? And then in come the acquisitions. Where are they not the same in terms of either data or this connection between administration and accounting? So
everybody's different, obviously, and everybody does things the way they think is the best way to do it. So there were some lessons that we've learned, but having your lease administration team separate, and in some cases it was a separate third-party provider altogether from the accounting department. Some cases it's more integrated with accounting, and there's a less robust lease administration team. And either way has its pros and cons. Obviously, having that separation makes it harder to work together, makes it harder to find your information and integrate things. But what we found is with some of the third-party providers, they're able to focus more on the CoStar product. We learned a lot of things from some of the third-party providers because they can focus on the system more. They do have more resources and better opportunities to beef up reporting or beef up functionality, things that you can't do on a daily basis when lease accounting is just one part of your day job, or in our case when lease administration is under the legal department. The system is nice, but it's just one thing that you do in any given day. It's not your primary focus. So there are pros and cons of both, but I think the biggest challenge is just laying your hands on the information when you go into a new place, understanding the documentation, understanding the process, understanding where those divisions are.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you said there that surprised me a little bit when we spoke was that if you're looking at this external company, it's an acquisition, and you hear, oh, they've got a real estate service provider, I would have thought that was added complexity. Turns out that real estate service provider is doing a great job with those leases. You actually have high quality data, in some cases better than an internal department from an acquisition, just might not be doing it very well. So I was surprised to learn that was in some cases a positive for an acquired company if somebody's doing a really good job with those leases. So Jim, I think when you and I were talking on the phone, when we got the lessons learned, It's like, oh, I've got several.
Yeah.
It seemed like there were a bunch of really terrific lessons learned and observations on your side.
Well, there were.
Yeah.
Our implementation, we started in August, and then we went live in April. So, a little timeline for you. The first one, when you're developing your project plan, you have to give sufficient time for data collection and data review. So it touches upon the garbage in, garbage out concept. But if you don't have sufficient time to do data collection and data review, you're going to have a mess on your hands, literally. So what we did was we put 3 full-time equivalents on the data collection. We scrubbed it, and then after we flipped from 840 to 842, we had additional data fields required for the lease accounting. So we actually pulled in 4 attorneys, and when we plowed through our legal documents and make sure that we were totally compliant with the requirements for the additional data fields for 842. Really good story, really good lesson learned.
Mm-hmm.
So number 2 is lease data portfolio, constant change in process flow. So we touched upon it earlier in the conversation earlier today that your equipment leasing, your forklift, your transportation is constantly changing. In our business, any lease, we're bringing in new leases on equipment. So your portfolio is moving on you. So it's a very difficult when you're doing implementation to have one data load.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up doing 2. We did an initial data load so we could get confidence with the reports and the schedule and everything. And then immediately prior to going live, we did another one. So the lesson learned is plan for 2 data loads. 1 initial and 1 before you go live. And the third critical, as I thought about your question, is documentation. So a lot of people will tell you bring your external auditors in early. Wise counsel. Bring them in because you have a lot of elections to do, a lot of decisions. You got a lot of discussions with the Big Four. We have to have Deloitte. And they'll have opinions. And you want to make sure their opinions are heard and they get comfortable with your deployment. So bring them in early, and then leverage your project charter. So we did a full-fledged, project charter that had project manager, deliverable, risk, communications, and then you backfill as you move on with adoption memos. We had over a dozen adoption memos.
Mm.
So that included discount rate, practical expedient, how we did the migration from one real estate system, no system, if you call Excel a system, for equipment leasing to CoStar. You have to talk your external auditors through that. So it requires documentation. And then we did a robust accounting policy and procedure. So comprehensive policy procedure with our adoption memos in the appendix, and that created a consistent knowledge base between legal, IT, accounting, operations, real estate, of where we were headed. So without that document, it can get kind of messy in terms of where you're headed. And we did put up $400 million right in use asset on our balance sheet. That's a big number.
Yeah.
So a lot of scrutiny, all the way up to the audit. Finally, we leveraged the CoStar documentation. Again, this goes back a few years, so it's changed, enhanced, if you will. But we leveraged the screenshots from the CoStar documentation, and we created a 35-page desktop procedure. So our lease accountings, they take the screenshots, and they know exactly what to do from the lens of our ERP system. So that's really important because it can differ. We have a different ERP in Canada than we do in the United States, so we have a US and a Canada desktop procedure. So that's the documentation lesson there.
Very interesting. I think talking about documentation, I think you're the only one that brought that up. At least got me thinking about it, which got me thinking about process, right? Because a lot of what we've discussed is about implementation, right? So getting through the project of lease accounting and the impact on lease administration. Cindy, just a quick question for you, not to spring one on you, but it should be an easy one. So after the project's finished, right? Can you just talk about the process of what happens when a lease changes? So the lease accounting project's behind you, but now you're in steady state, operational state, right? How does that change all get communicated forward to the lease accounting side?
You know, we have, you know, notifications that go to the accounting once. So we get notified when the lease is executed, because all of our accounting schedules are now off of lease execution date versus commencement date. So that was a big change for us. So once we have that execution date, then that notification goes to the appropriate parties. Accounting gets notified that the lease is in CoStar. We start the abstracting process, and then once the abstract's completed, then we let accounting know that it's done.
Okay. So I think in terms of lessons learned and things to think about, especially in terms of, if I think about all the customers that are online, so many of you have been either in the middle of or through or just recently through the lease accounting project itself. So now steady state, right? So through the project, wipe the brow, okay, but are you ready for the ongoing operational aspect? And I think integrations come into that too, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Trey, I just want to check up with you. I saw a lot of head nodding on documentation and process and so forth. Just wondered if something came to mind that I wanted to catch from you.
Well, so Jim's kind of who we want to be when we grow up, because right now we're taking all of these brands and we're moving them to the same ERP. So I'm on my third Oracle integration or implementation in the last 18 months. And each one of those comes with a CoStar integration and an onboarding of the brand. And I just had my lessons learned meeting out of our Oracle implementation, and the number one thing we said was documentation is key. Not just documentation to get you through the process, but that exit documentation to say, we've built this, now what is it, and what do we do with it, and how do we keep that steady state moving forward. So I think that's a great point. The documentation is awesome, especially for a company that's in an acquisition mode, because you know the next brand is right around the corner. So it becomes your playbook, and it becomes taking credit for all the work that you've done, all those late nights that you've spent working on this stuff over the last however long. But as far as integrations go, the lessons that we've learned is that the integrations are key to scalability. I mean, I think we have 8 integrations currently in place, and we're building a 9th for the enterprise data warehouse, and so other groups can share the information that's in CoStar. But the integrations are key to scalability right now, because we went from a company with 1,000 real estate leases to now we have over 2,000 real estate leases and several thousand, I think over 3,000 equipment leases, and I've added 1 FTE to my team. So that leveraging the systems ability and the scalability of that helps you work much more efficiently, helps your reporting be much more efficient. And I think starting with the documentation, having that good plan that Jim referenced is really key. Knowing what you want to get out of the system. I've got a page full of notes from sitting and just listening here today to say, I didn't even know it could do that. And I've been in the system for over 2 years and not quite 18.
I've been in the system 18 years, and I learned something new today. You guys have all heard, we've been using CoStar for a long time, right? So back in 2001, documentation was not that important to US Bank. Speed up to 2008, when all of a sudden the financial industry started crashing, and then speed up to 2012, when all the regulators said, where's all your documentation? Where's all your documentation? So my lesson learned on documentation is that always started at the beginning. Even if you don't think it's a good idea at the time, it will be someday, and you will really, really, really appreciate it. That's where we've had to play a lot of catch up, because our leases have been in CoStar, and we've gone through, different levels of abstracting and different levels of accounting, and now we're to the point that we are now. and now we're playing catch up with documentation. So I
Great
wish I
advice.
even had like half of their
Yeah.
documentation.
Can you guys talk about managing up? In other words, all this stuff we've talked about, how much did you have to explain it to the people above you in terms of, wow, you're not gonna believe this, this is gonna take more time than we expected, and by the way, we have to do things in lease admin we didn't know we had to do, and by the way, we should have allowed more time. You're like, can you just talk about managing up in the process of this conversation we've been having?
Started with my executive sponsor, chief accounting officer. So I met with him, said, here's what we want to do. Here's a communication plan, right? Because what you're talking about is communicating, out and up. So we had a steering committee every month, typical floor blocker. And that's a common term, but it's what you did last period, what you're planning on, the risks, how you're mitigating your milestones, and how you're tracking, sort of. That's the concept. So we did that very effectively, and we had IT, real estate, ops, accounting, legal, fully represented. So we scheduled it well in advance, and we managed up from there, informing where the project was to mitigate surprises. In any large enterprise project, no one likes surprises. So, and your risks have to be documented. Lower, that's block number 2.
Yeah.
Of what your identifiable risk going into the project and how you're mitigating those risks as the project moves. So managing up in the steering committee is paramount. And then we leverage that with our external auditors. So when we did 842, we brought Deloitte into the meetings. They were part of the steering committee. So to not lose any time or misclarity, or confusion as they're communicating to the audit committee where we stood. So, there were some surprises, like discount rates, right? We thought we had it nailed.
There's those discount rates.
We thought we had it nailed. We thought, all Big Four had signed off on it. It went all the way up to national, but it came back down different. So we had a surprise at the last minute, but it was very limited in terms of the number and the magnitude, because we did have that steering committee and that communication up. That it's paramount in these type of enterprise endeavors.
So Trey, I wanted to ask you the same thing, because you're living in the acquisitions world, right? You're in the fire. I'm sure every time they start talking about an acquisition, let's get it done fast, let's make it accretive, let's get it in. How do you sort of manage up in terms of all these things that need to be considered for you to, how do you set those expectations, or maybe how did you? Because maybe you have that squared away now, but I'm thinking about.
Got it all figured out now.
Exactly.
But, no, it's a lot of fun. I mean, the chaos of growth can be a lot of fun, and it can be almost easier to manage expectations in that kind of high growth, more chaotic environment than it can even be in your stable, going through the everyday process. Because I can think of, we're kind of a tale of two companies. When we were very stable and very steady, I think it would have been much harder to pitch these system improvements and pitch these process improvements and dedicating the time to these things. But then once you get into this high growth environment and everybody's thinking growth and scalability, it's an easier process to explain that, versus we're doing the same thing we were doing yesterday. Why all of a sudden do you want to change everything? So I'm fortunate to have that cover of growth to help me along through the process, but you still have to communicate consistently and effectively. You have to say things sometimes several times in a row before they figure out, well, this guy's serious. But you just keep at it. You keep communicating it. And again, I hate to keep repeating, Jim, but you go back to documentation. You will never regret writing something down later on, but you'll always kick yourself when you get to a point where you need something and it's not there. So I think just take advantage of the systems where you can, like where you can document inside your your system, whether it be CoStar or Excel. But you'll never regret writing something down later on down the road.
So Cindy, it's slightly different in your world. I wanted to ask the similar question, but actually sort of point specifically at like the VP of corporate real estate or whoever runs real estate at the executive level at the bank. When lease accounting came along and you had to help senior management understand, this is impacting me, this is impacting us. Let me tell you about time and process and change. Can you just talk a little bit about that process and that dynamic, if you will?
So those of you that have worked in the financial industry know that there's a lot of red tape. You got to talk to a lot of different people. So corporate real estate doesn't really make decisions. We get told how we're going to handle the leases. So even though we knew the accounting standards were coming down, the accounting policy group is the group that looks at, how are we going to handle it? How do we want to account for the leases? And they took a year and a half to decide, which left us 6 months to implement. So we were getting ready to implement, and then the controller, who oversees the accounting policy, said, oh no, that's not the way I want to do it. So then we got down to 4 months. So it wasn't really us managing them as much as we were just kind of waiting for those accounting decisions to come down and, trying to do as much data quality as we possibly could, knowing kind of where they were going. But it was a lot of, with the bank and how it was going to impact the balance sheet, and then, then that affects your capital ratios. There's so much that's out of the control of corporate real estate. So it was really just waiting for those decisions.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about communication and education, right? So it sounds like even managing up, right? It's just an awful lot of communicating and helping everybody understand the impact and doing that effectively so that people can make budget and resource decisions and with their eyes wide open about the issues. So.
Correct.
Great. So I wanted to turn kind of our closing topic to integrations. Trey, you started us off on this a little bit, so maybe Jim, I'd turn to you. Mm-hmm. We had those presentations today about enterprise integrations, and I think everybody's kind of got their head around now, wow, that's a great way to expand the value around the system, this notion of connected CoStar. So I'd asked each of the panelists to just talk about what integrations they have in place today and what their integration plans are. So Jim, could start with you on that topic. Yeah. Tell us about your integration profile.
Integration profile, we got basically CoStar is our book of record. We view it as a subledger. We can't pay a real estate or a non-real estate lease without having it in CoStar. So we don't have any, we have a closed loop AP. Mm-hmm. So, it came up less than an hour ago about the benefits of a closed loop, but let me just define it. CoStar pushes a file to our primary AP module, and it catches it, and then makes a payment, real estate or non-real estate, and then pushes a file back to CoStar, acknowledging the payment. Closed loop AP, you don't have an AP reconciliation nightmare on your hands. So integration-wise, probably one of our best decisions we made early on. And we did that for our primary, AP. We didn't do it for everyone because we have 6 environments. But for the primary one, it's been a great time saver, success story, great decision. So from an integration standpoint, AP definitely. GL, we're integrated with 2 primary GLs, one US, one Canada, and then everything else is offline. Mm-hmm. Meaning it's, we get a report and then we post a manual journal entry in those 4 other ERPs. So that's sort of like the integration.
Okay. And Blackline's been mentioned in a couple of presentations.
Yeah.
That's for those that are not real familiar with it, I think many companies are, but it's one of the leading reconciliation products. So I don't think we're integrated with Blackline yet, but is that something that's intended, and do you see value in that?
Yes, I do, and I was also the project lead sponsor for Blackline. So I've had the benefit to have 3 cloud, implementations here in my company. and one was Workiva, right? And that had really no integrations per se, but then Blackline and then CoStar. So I'm very familiar with the functionality. I think it has a lot of value. I'm glad you guys are partnering, in that direction, because you could have a lot of benefits, time savings on the back end reconciliation on when these leases, right, these assets are on the balance sheet now. That's a game changer.
Yep.
Because you audit the balance sheet, the P&L falls out. We got, self-intuitive, but that's reality. So if your balance sheet's right, your P&L is right. So that's where I got off topic from your question, but if we're able to effectively leverage auto certification through the Blackline app, it's a game changer.
Yep. Yep. That's part of what we see too. I know that this notion of digital transformation is kind of, maybe it's an overused term, right? And I think if I think about the audience out there, we can all sort of let out a sigh. It's like, oh gosh, digital transformation, what is it? Because it's big and there's a lot of it. But what we are seeing is there's an ecosystem of technologies that are starting to form up in the administration and finance and accounting areas. And the more all of us as technology providers are integrated one to another, the more all customers benefit through automation and taking advantage of those integrations. So Cindy, I wanted to turn back to you next about your integrations, many of which have been in place for a while. Can you just talk about the ones that you have and some of the business value and how they're used?
Yep, so we have 7. We have an inbound and an outbound AP. All of our rent payments get initiated in CoStar, and then they're paid through our accounts payable. And then we do have payment information coming back, if it's either ACH or check, coming back into CoStar. We do a vendor reconciliation where we send the vendor, the landlord information to AP. They validate it before we send the payment file so that we don't have any rejects for processing. We also do our lockbox. So we receive all of our income from our tenants, their checks, their payments into a lockbox, and then that lockbox file is integrated into CoStar so we can match receivable balances. Then that will create journal entries for offsetting the cash. There's a reconciliation between GL and the accounts receivable in CoStar. We also initiate all of our ACH payments out of CoStar for our parkers, any of the landlords that pay via ACH. And then we do a building data file to a data warehouse within US Bank where different business lines go out and pull that information into their own applications. It cuts down on us having to send reports all over US Bank, creates that one central source that people can grab the facility information.
I'm just particularly energized about having such a varied composite of company types here, because you have integrations that are just wholly unapplicable to some other industries, and yet you have them, and you're taking business value from those integrations, and it just brings that level of automation that we talked about.
Right.
So Trey, you talked about the topic a few minutes ago, but can you expand on what your integration profile looks like?
So, like I said, we have 8 integrations. Currently, we're working on our 9th, but we integrate into AP, we integrate into our AR. We have our restaurant sales coming back into the system for our percentage rent, and each one of our brands has a different percentage rent calculation. So Jimmy was right earlier, where it's not easy to get the accrual written, but you can get there for sure. The vendors and the customers, we integrate those with the Oracle AP and AR. The AP history is now coming back into CoStar, it's actually a really powerful tool. We didn't do it when we initially implemented, and we've recently turned that on, and I was surprised at how many people outside of accounting think that's a great idea, because not everyone is super keen to log into Oracle. A lot of people, if you're outside of accounting and finance and you say just log into Oracle and get it, they kind of give up and walk away. But if you can give them an easier, friendlier place to go get it, that's been the one that surprised me the most is, people in the real estate team, people in lease administration or legal or facilities or whatever group needs to get some information. That's been the surprising one that people have enjoyed the most. And then our general ledger with our journal entries is integrated as well.
Terrific. So, so for the audience here in Atlanta, as well as everybody online and in our remote cities, this is one of the greatest examples, I think, of the things we've talked about today. There must be, I don't know, about 20 integrations or so, but just between 3 customers here, all grabbing that business value as it applies to their particular industry, right? And getting that benefit. So that's terrific. So I think just that's kind of a wrap on our topics. Maybe I would just ask each of you just any other last closing thoughts. Maybe Cindy, I'll start with you. Just anything maybe we haven't talked about that you'd share with somebody who's going on this journey and
Run. No, it's an exciting time. There's attention to it. Nobody likes to think about accounting schedules and lease administration, but there's a new emphasis, and it's a great opportunity to use the tools that CoStar has, with the integrations to help simplify your processes. I mean, I'm all about simplification. Anything that I can have somebody else do or have a system do for me, sign me up. And I think the lesson that I have learned, and I learn it every time I come into this great city of Atlanta when I'm at a CoStar event, is that I just need to ask. Because you just never
thanks
know.
for mentioning that. That's
And
great.
You just never know what Jimmy forgot to tell you.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's funny, when we were on the phone, one of the things that I wrote down was that you like to simplify things, and I forgot to ask you about it, so I'm glad you brought that up. Trey, just any parting remarks, as we've kind of been through the session here that come to mind?
I agree with Cindy. I agree that when you're implementing a system that you've never put in before, you don't know to ask what you don't know. So taking advantage of events like this, and even taking advantage of the people in the room and the knowledge in the CoStar community is really, really very helpful. You can always learn a trick of what somebody is doing and what you're not doing. So it's a pretty robust system, but you don't always get to see all of that at once. And the one thing that continuously surprises me too is how great the help section is. My staff people come, especially the little videos.
Yeah.
Have you seen those?
Yeah.
Those are super great. They're like little YouTube videos.
2.5 minutes.
I know, and you can do anything if the YouTube video is less than 5 minutes. Yes. You want to drywall your house? If it's 6 minutes, you pay somebody. If it's 4 minutes, you do it yourself. That's just the rule. But these little YouTube videos are actually pretty helpful and pretty cool. And I found that for my newer staff people, they really gravitate to that, and that really clicks with them. So I think that's a pretty helpful feature.
It's so good to hear that. I think about both of your comments. I mean, we are investing, right, and trying to do a much better job in communicating and bringing customers together and content that Robin talked about, and just hearing that it's being used for the purpose that we intended it. That's really exciting feedback for us, and we hope for the other customers that are online, if they're not taking advantage of those assets, they certainly should. So Jim, maybe I'll turn to you here last. Any parting thoughts about the journey, either behind you or forward?
Two comments come to mind. Communication.
Yep.
Use SharePoint, collaborative tool, plop all your documentation on a dedicated SharePoint site. Make sure your entire project team has access to that SharePoint site so they have the collaboration that you need in this project, number one. Number two, I'm glad you mentioned YouTube videos, because when we created the 30-page desktop procedures, we went to the CoStar website, we copied the URL and embedded that into our document.
Fantastic.
So when we turn it over to the desktop people doing the job, it's like, read all this, but then go to the appendix and view these YouTube videos. So you hit it, this goes back 3 years, but thank you for mentioning it, because it's really relevant and really important that you guys continue your journey on the video, because the millennials of the world, now I'm not one, they absorb that.
Yep. No, that's a great way to end is content, right? Content is evolving.
It is.
And, we as a company are evolving with it. We're catching up to it a little bit, but I think we're doing a much better job. And part of our job is to have, multiple channels of content for our customers, whether that's PDF documentation or whether that's, video training or whether that's video snippets that have been referred to here. And the more content we can make available to our customers, and Robin mentioned our self-service model, I think the better we'll be at serving customers, because the market's moving that way, right? People want to self-serve first and see if I can just solve for it before I go ask for that help, and then if they need the help, they've got a place to go. So I think that's a wrap for me. I just want to thank you guys so much. Before we did this panel, I had the privilege of getting on the phone with each of you for a little over an hour, and we tossed around a bunch of ideas, and we all took a bunch of notes, and we thought, how do we address these issues? And you guys have done such a terrific job for us, and thank you very much.